And a little bit more about kind of what this is. Most people here are probably familiar with BlueBridge, and I recognize many of you guys. What we're really doing here with this educational series is we focus on a specific group that is within our realm of service. So obviously today's manufacturing, and we hammer out some of the challenges and technical developments that are within that specific industry. And to that effect, we get a panel with industry experts, people that are actively watching the emerging technologies intermingle with their business and how they are acclimating, how they are implementing, and kind of what they see going on in the future. And the purpose of this is also to spur conversation. So after we go through the panel questions, we'll open it up for Q&A. And talk about it. And I look forward to, at the end of this, talking to each of you about your individual challenges with technology as you implement it in your businesses today. So now I'd like to allow the panel to introduce themselves because I'm terrified of screwing it up myself. We'll start with our CTO, Roger, and work from there. So, Roger?
Hi, my name is Roger Mitan. I'm the CTO of BlueBridge Networks. Been in IT for 30-ish years. Seen a lot of things change. Unlike a lot of the folks been in there for a long time, I love cutting edge. I don't like sticking with the old stuff, so to speak, unless it's tried and true. So always looking for the latest and greatest and staying up to date and keeping us up to date.
My name's Dresch with Maloney Novotny. I'm an IT auditor there. Like Roger, I've been in IT for probably 25, 30 years now also. Same thing, I love to play with the newest and latest, greatest technology, stay up on what's happening. A lot of what I do also forces me to stay up on compliance also. It's going to be a big thing coming for manufacturers.
My name is Scaccia. My name is Scaccia. My company's USA Firmware. I'm president there. We provide design services for regional companies as well as national companies. So if you can imagine, there's a whole horde of companies right now that are going through disruption and going through the need to incorporate electronics and firmware and cloud development and software and mobile apps into their product portfolios, and perhaps they make pipes, and now all of a sudden they need to have all these additional capabilities to be able to be competitive, and we'll talk more about that. So that's my firm. My background, I have a degree in electrical engineering from 1984, so about 30 some odd years of experience, and primarily in product development through my entire career.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. So we're going to actually get to start with Roger, and I'm curious, when you're looking at data breaches or cybersecurity risks, fears, concerns, what kind of data is being targeted? Because I think that's a good way to kind of open up this dialogue.
Sure. So it really depends on the organizations and also the intent of the person perpetrating the attack. So it's anything from people just trying to do standard where they're encrypting your data, so like crypto, ransomware type of things. To items like when it comes to manufacturing or other companies like that, where we're looking for or they're looking for proprietary information. They want to get people's information so they can go and sell that and have somebody else take all the work that you guys have put into stuff and use it themselves or sell it to somebody else who's going to use it. So really that's another big target. And then the third target is really just financial, trying to send phishing emails or things like that to get companies to send them checks, randomly, things like that. So.
Okay. And as far as protecting the data goes, obviously, Dale, you're interfacing primarily with auditing that, those security concerns. What is the current norm for information security in manufacturing, and how does that differ from other industries such as health and finance?
That's going to be a two-part answer. The current norm is it was not like a very highly regulated industry or sector of the industry. You sort of applied in cybersecurity controls or information technology controls where you could, but that's changing now. It's going to end up being a lot more regulated, so like cybersecurity controls, how you implement technology, how you program your products is going to become more important on how you protect that process. Like the big buzzword now is supply chain. So people are realizing that they're taking pieces and parts from all these different manufacturers and assembling them into their own products. But they want to know how you're securing it, or they don't want to backdoor into their software because they used, you know, a firmware of yours that might have a flaw that could be exploited. So, like following that chain all the way back, proving how you're actually protecting that data or how you're actually protecting that product is going to become more important. So I think you're going to see a lot more regulation on how manufacturing is done moving into the future. So.
Do you want?
Yeah, the question, so do you think that because of all the regulation, it'll help with the issue that we don't have good standardization?
You would hope. That hasn't been the case with a lot of regulation when it comes to IT and cybersecurity and stuff like that, but I think it's becoming a lot more mainstream to where anything will help at this point because it's sort of the Wild West. I don't want to say that as coy or anything, but any type of structure is hopefully going to translate into some positive changes at least.
It just seems to me that if you have standardization, you'll be able to have better regulation as well as better success in reviewing products that need to be under regulation.
Kind of to build off of regulation, obviously last year was a year of going to conferences and having everyone talk about how GDPR is going to affect them, their fears, their concerns, what that is, what that isn't. Dale, what has happened? What has happened as a result of GDPR? What has its actual impact been, and obviously specifically to manufacturers?
I hate to say not a lot. The great thing about GDPR is it forced everybody to look at their data. Like before now, there wasn't really a reason to say, hey, what do I actually collect from my customers? What do I actually collect from, you know, my clients? Like what kind of data do I actually have? And it sort of forced everybody to take a look at what they have and say, yeah, you know what, is some exposure here. Do I really need to collect this? Do I really need this? Is this going to adversely affect me somehow if I am breached? So like as far as like enforcement and like forcing people down that road, it probably wasn't as effective as everybody wanted it to be, but it started the ball rolling. And you're seeing a lot of states pick up on that also. Like New York has a specific cybercrime law out there. California just came up with a privacy one. And you're gonna see every one of these states, every one of our states start to come up with something to protect the consumer or something to protect like the public from, you know, any liability the manufacturer would have if a data breach were to occur. So just seeing that curve is, you're going to have to start building that into your processes now because it's something that you're going to end up having to do, and probably in multiple different ways, depending on how many states you actually do business in too. So GDPR got the ball rolling, but as far as like the actual like enforcement of it, it probably hasn't had as much teeth as everybody thought it was going to. So.
Well, and that's based on it really affects European citizens, correct?
Correct. If you have European citizen data, that's why I'm saying it forced people to actually look at what type of data they were actually collecting because there could be some exposure. So.
Sure, and as far as states having their own individual regulations on that, there's really no federal universal thing that we're rolling out, right?
No, not really. No.
And there's a can of worms that comes with every state having different regulations.
Correct. And I think on the regulator side too, we're gonna have to try to come up with a way to make this not arduous for everyone to do. Because you want them to adopt this stuff because it's good for all of us. It's good for the consumer. So you want it to be easy to adopt into their workflows. You don't want to completely disrupt how they do business.
So as an implementer in IoT, Bob, what cybersecurity concerns, thoughts do you put into that, and what are the overall hesitations that manufacturers might have implementing IoT today?
All right. Well, let me talk about hesitations first because it's a pretty big topic. There's lots of things that prevent people from kind of taking the leap. And the way I look at it is that you have you have what you have today, and let's say you're manufacturing, you're not leveraging IoT or IoT. And in a sense, you've got decent security and decent trust of your data because you're not accessing the outside world, right? And I mean, I'm sure it's not perfect, but you have a good set of trusted systems within the walls of your factory. Now, if you're going to send that data outside of your factory, you're going to be bringing that data inside that factory. Now, the walls of trust have started to crumble, right? Because you don't know what you're sending out is going to be intercepted by the wrong people, or you don't know if the data coming back is going to be attacked or spoofed and things of that sort. So it's kind of like you've got a trusted system, and in reality, at the end of the day, it's really all about having trust in the data that you have and trust in the people and systems that you have. So we kind of got, you've got a lot of risk to go from where we are today and go through the muck of having to deal with a very insecure internet infrastructure because it wasn't designed for security. So you have to add encryption, and you have to add digital certification, and you've got to make sure that who's sending that data and who's receiving that data are trusted entities, whether it's a machine or a human being. So as a result, that's the challenge. The challenge is that you've got to take on risk in order to be able to take advantage of IoT. And you've got to be able to take on risk from a capital perspective, potentially retraining of your talent, and you've got nimble, smaller entities, maybe than yourselves, who can be nimble and agile and potentially put these things in place without a lot of additional I can't say the word, let's just say bureaucracy. I was trying to find a better word than bureaucracy, but it didn't work. So, but anyway, so bureaucracy and instituted cultures and things like that versus a nimble small company who could, start to penetrate your market share because of the fact that now they have easily been able to make that transition because they don't have all this overhead to deal with. So I think that answers your question, that there's lots of challenges. I got some notes here, workforce fears, folks being worried about losing their jobs because they're being replaced by machines. Your IP, your secret sauce, I would highly recommend you keep that in the facility, but there might be advantages to having your IP, your intellectual property, your secret sauce. If you're a large enough organization, to be able to have all that data and do analytics on it. And the other way to do that is maybe you have to have that IP pulled from your various factories. And that's kind of scary. That's your secret sauce. If that got out, you could do serious damage to your business. So at the end of the day, it's a matter of going from where you are today and being able to take the risk that, okay, there's a lot of disruption here, and I'm going to take the risk that at the end of the day, the investment I'm going to put in is going to keep me competitive with my peers. I have a little note here too I wrote down. I don't know, maybe most of us in this room knows, but Bill Gates in 1994. Does anyone know the story of Bill Gates, what he said about the internet in 1994? He said it wasn't going to be a viable commercial product for 10 years. So the next year, Bill Gates and Microsoft turned their entire ship around and hit the internet hard. Because Bill had the data. I'm sure they had the data. They were the largest software company on the planet. Well, most companies don't have that data. But it's really the same kind of thing, that it might not be really visible that there's really commercial viability with what's happening, and why you need, to move down this road, but it's not in a nice, neat package where you can look at the data and say, oh yeah, definitely, we're good. You kind of have to collect the data first before you start to see the fruits of that data and do the analytics.
Interesting. And Roger, from an infrastructure provider perspective, whether it's virtual or physical, what does IoT and the industrial Internet of Things mean for that industry?
IoT means, a lot of IoT things, you mean pertaining to security or just in general?
Both security and storage.
So we'll start with security. So security, IoT, as we were talking earlier, IoT wasn't really built for security. So you need to have some products. If you are going to have those things integrated to the internet in some way, you need to have something in front of them, or you need to go through an expensive process of updating, older devices to newer things so that they have that that security built in. The other piece is today, a lot of the data that, you know, we're talking about business analytics, a lot of that data needs to go somewhere to be analyzed. So it needs to go, you know, out to a partner that does business analytics, out to the cloud, things like that. And I think as we move more into the future, and as processors become more powerful, I think that's going to, a lot of that's going to be done more at the edge, versus than out, you know, having to go out to the cloud. Which just means that you're going to have more data that you have to secure within your environment, whereas today a lot of that security is being taken care of by other people in other locations.
You know, I totally agree. I think if you don't need this data to leave your building, don't allow it to leave the building. You don't need a warning off of an industrial machine to leave your facility. There's no reason to do that. The only reason you might need it to leave the building is if you want, again, do high-level analytics to be able to do a more pervasive study of what, you know, what your various systems are doing. And I think right now, you know, everyone's enamored with the idea of the cloud and, oh, you know, we can send all this data out and we have this high horsepower to take care of all this analytics. Well, as mentioned, you know, that's starting to come, you know, just like with anything, I mean, in terms of technology, things get more and more and more powerful. And at the edge, you can do some really amazing things with analytics and even in a large facility. So you don't necessarily need to have, in fact, in some cases, you might not want any of that data to leave your facility. So, you know, start to learn more about edge computing, because I think that that is the next step, is to, you know, if you need it to leave the building, you better have a darn good reason, because again, now you're dealing with all these security concerns. You still have security concerns in the building, but still they're much more pervasive if you leave the building.
Great, and Dale, how does all of the edge computing and the sensors and the IoT devices affect your job as an auditor?
It definitely makes it tougher to follow the data, to follow the trail sometime, but every one of these like edge computing vendors that you would possibly use does do a set of due diligence documents so that you can see what practices they have in place. Because like you said, you are putting your data in their hands, so you want to make sure the hands that you're placing them in actually knows what they're doing with your data, and knowing where your data is too, knowing what type of data you have and where it's actually going. Like that's like the baseline, and you would imagine that that's where you want to start. But like I said, all of these vendors do have due diligence things out there, do have audits, they do this stuff annually. They don't do it for themselves, they do it for you guys to be able to see what type of practices they have in place. So I totally agree. Embracing that type of edge computing is probably the future, but you also have to do it, you also have to be aware of what practices they have in place and how they're actually protecting your data, and make sure that you actually do that instead of just signing a contract and hoping.
Now, are those regulations done as like wrapped into existing like audits, or are there going to be, do you see coming down the pipeline some kind of audit specific to edge computing or specific to IoT?
Yes, that hasn't been developed yet. Yeah, I eventually see some type of like certification process happening for like IoT devices or stuff like that. A lot of the other stuff I'm talking about are like soccer boards.
Yeah, so you get wrapped into existing audits.
Yep.
Okay, great. So if you follow a lot of like tech news, 5G is coming / is here, depending on where you're at. And there's a lot of concerns, questions, excitement about what that means for connectivity as it pertains to business. This is kind of an open question to anyone who wants to grab it, but what are the major changes you guys anticipate coming with 5G?
I think you probably can do more at the edge, and I'm no 5G expert. But now what you're talking about is being able to have even more data, perhaps within the factory to be able to do more data processing. I don't know if I'm incorrect or correct, that just is the sense that I would have with respect to 5G.
So I think what 5G is bringing a lot of, is going to be bringing, people, we think of 5G, on our mobile devices and things like that, but there is actually a lot of companies that are putting their own private 5G networks up inside their factories. And that gives them, you know, more security, or more in the, you know, more speed, less latency. So all that is going to, of course, lead to, like you said, more data. So ultimately, what 5G is going to do is generate more data that you then have to protect.
Yeah, like faster connectivity, but more connectivity at like whatever endpoint, mobile phone, laptops, or whatever is fantastic. It's awesome. The more, you know, you have people out there being able to use your product and produce your product, the more creativity you have. On the flip side of that, I think specifically 5G has really placed, like I said, for the supply chain aspect of security in the forefront. As you know, like Germany has decided to go with Huawei to produce their country's 5G network. And there are a lot of concerns that, well, Huawei is a Chinese company, so are they actually creating a backdoor into Germany's 5G network? Are you going to depend on another nation state to protect your, you know, cell phone infrastructure, your 5G infrastructure? So it's really brought to the forefront, hey, like how are these companies actually producing these things in a secure way? And is there anything in there that could hurt me or my, you know, my citizens or my consumers' type product? So it really has brought that to the forefront.
Sure. Was that the Huawei thing doesn't really lap on your shores as an auditor, does it? Like not right now. Okay. This just I read that article very recently too, because I think it was just released. So I was curious if that was something that's on your map.
It's sort of, it is. The AICPA is actually developing an audit specifically for supply chain. It's years away from being ready, but sort of to your question about IoT, I see the same sort of thing probably happening for supply chain as well as IoT. There will be some specific certification for that type of stuff. So.
Keeping you employed.
Exactly.
Bob, as an implementer, how are you considering security moving into these projects?
Yeah, so I, you know, I look at it as, it's not a whole lot different than any product development. It's just a matter of that the requirements are different, the scope is different. So like, for example, some of the requirements that you need to focus on are things like, okay, where's this, like your end device, which is really what we would like. Where's it going to be stored? Is it going to be stored in a locked cabinet? Is it going to be stored in the public domain? Is it going to be stored in a secure facility or an unsecure facility? So those are things you need to look at. You need to know what all your interfaces are that are going to be connecting to that device. And again, you know, how secure are those different interfaces? Is it a serial port or is it an Ethernet connection? Is it using MQTT or Modbus? Things of that sort. And then you know, have kind of a plan for you know, testing for vulnerabilities. You know, partner with a firm that'll come in and beat it up, make sure that it is solid. Use things like looking at my notes because I got smarter people in my office than me. Common vulnerabilities and exposures. That's a database that, you know, lists all of the different vulnerabilities that are out there, and then testing against those things. Having a contingency plan for, okay, if my data is attacked, can I recover? And then things like trade-offs. So let's say it's a machine and it's really a low-risk machine. It doesn't really tie in that well into our secret sauce. All right, how much infrastructure and how much potentially added unreliability am I adding? Because whenever you add things, you just add more unreliability. So do I really need to go to the nth degree on adding security there versus, holy cow, if we don't secure this device, it's their secret sauce that's going to get out. Or, holy cow, if I don't secure this device, an attack could shut down my entire facility for 2 months. So you know, you have to look at each and every use case and look at what your constraints are and look what your requirements are and figure out what the right solution is.
Fair and concise. That was good. As far as all this replication and backups, obviously there's a bit of a security concern to that, Roger. How are you seeing manufacturers use the data backup and replication today, and how do you think that that's going to change as technology develops?
So typically what I've seen is that, you know, most manufacturers, you know, will, I guess, have a tendency to concentrate their resources a lot more on manufacturing the products, right, and getting them out, making the money. So they might not be investing today in, you know, as heavily as they should be in their IT infrastructure and in backups and replication. So typically they'll just have some type of backup device, and back it up, and somebody will check once in a while, and, you know, not everybody, I'm not trying to insult anybody out there, but I see that in a lot of manufacturers. You know, something will come along, like they'll lose their data, they'll go to restore it, and they'll find out their backups haven't been running for, you know, a month or two or something like that. So it's really important going forward to either bring that resource in or bring in a partner that can just take that off your hands or help you out with that, and make sure that the data gets backed up, and not just on-site, somewhere off-site securely. And then I always tell my guys, I always like having multiple layers of backups with different recovery points, recovery times. And I think that's important here as well. You know, how long can you really afford to be down if something happens to your data is a really important issue that everybody needs to look at, and how much is it worth to you to invest in that and make sure that you have that. Because it's not something you can get a typical simple ROI off of unless something happens to you. So it's really something you have to look at, what is that value? And I mean, I think it's very important. You know, we see companies that you know, they get attacked or down for days or longer, restoring their data, trying to bring tapes back and things like that. So it's a combination of having the processes in place, the technology in place, people trained so they know what to do when something like this happens. Training is really a really big piece of that as well. So when something happens, to just follow their training, bring back the data, everything, you know, is back up and running again.
And with all the new data sources, with smart devices or smart you know, manufacturing machining, do you see a new front of backups that need to be brought to the manufacturers?
Yeah, like I said, as you know, as we implement newer technologies, there's going to be more data is going to be backed up, and you know, also like we talked about earlier, you know, identifying what data you have and where it is important too. A lot of times people don't know what data they have where. They might go into, you know, a company and to do an assessment and find that, you know, they don't know they had this file server sitting over here from, you know, a few years ago they have data going to, or, you know, something along those lines. So it's really identifying, you know, not just new devices and new things coming along, but it's identifying what data you have, how relevant and important and, you know, critical it is to your environment, and then making sure that you have proper backups for that.
I agree. I think it depends upon the data itself and how important it is to the organization. And, you know, if you're a small company, you know, we're not a big company enough to have multiple sources of backup. But I can imagine, you know, with a large organization, you're going to have, you know, that there's costs to that, and there's risks to that as well. You know, you probably don't want to have data that leaves the building in order to be able to have that duplicate somewhere else in case the building burns down or something like that, or you have a security incident. But again, you know, it's costly, and it's a good idea to review how important is this data, how risky is it if we lose it. And put in systems that are relevant to the amount of risk that having that data be lost correlates to. Because again, if you're going to send that data outside the building, there's, you know, it's a dangerous world. You got to be careful. Make sure it's secure. So.
And Dale, as far as manufacturers go, what are the biggest cybersecurity mistakes you're seeing today? Not naming any names.
Training your employees, quite honestly. Your employees are your first and best line of defense. Give them the tools, give them the ability to make the right decisions you want them to make, like train them on how to protect you, train them on how to protect your data. And as we keep saying, data backups also. I see a lot of people not actually backing up data or not making sure that it, you know, does restore. And we can tell stories up here for the next hour of people who, you know, needed their backups, and oh my God, it hasn't run for the last 2 years. We just lost 2 years worth of business. I mean, everybody's heard that story. But the other thing too is don't be afraid to ask for help. I mean, there are people out there that will help you identify what type of data you have, where it's at. There are people that do nothing but make sure that your backups do work. Find those strategic partnerships. You're not alone. I mean, somebody has solved this problem. It's events like these. There's a lot of events all over Ohio that you can go to. Partners like BlueBridge. I mean, that's what you guys do. Like, don't be afraid to ask for help. This is probably one of your most important aspects of your business is your data. Make sure that it's taken care of.
And how are you seeing people get into networks when they do? Obviously, you're usually more on the the preventative maintenance side of things, but when people do break in, how are you seeing that? And you guys could chime into there too if you guys have experience.
95% of breaches start with a phishing. Somebody clicking an email, somebody clicking a link that they absolutely shouldn't. So, but it's all the basics. I mean, like you said, scanning for vulnerabilities, making sure those vulnerabilities aren't patched. You see a lot of patching is a problem where people don't realize that they have a web server out there that's vulnerable that nobody ever really looked at, nobody has applied a Windows update to. I mean, Microsoft releases those updates for a reason, so you should patch them. And 99% of the time, it won't bite you when you do. But I mean, that's the basic things that you can do that a lot of people don't, that will protect you in most cases. So.
Yeah, so the other thing that was coming to mind here for me was kind of using an analogy, home analogy. So, there's a risk of theft to your car, there's a risk of theft to your home. Well, heck, if you lock the door, they're going to go to the next door. If you lock your car, they're going to go to the next car. And maybe they're not going to get a whole lot of that other car, and boy, they'd like to get in that one that's locked, because then maybe it has money or it has values in it. But they're not going to mess around. They want to get in, find something, get out. It's not a whole lot different. I mean, they're going to go and they're going to fish around. They're going to find a vulnerability. And it's not that they're targeting, I think. You guys would know better, but I don't think they're targeting a particular vulnerability. They're just trying to figure out, is there a hole anywhere? And once they find that hole, they're going to take as much advantage of that hole as they can. And maybe it's your secret sauce, or maybe it's, whether or not a light switch is burning out in your facility. Don't know, but, they're going to try to find, just like anything, they're going to try to find the best. They're going to try to find ways to find holes, and it may end up that if they can't, it doesn't do much for them, but it may, they may hit the jackpot, right? So.
Yeah, I agree. It depends, like I said in the beginning, it depends on what the bad actor is looking for, right? Is their goal just, hey, I just want to go out and hack into something, or do they, are they something as big as a nation state or something where they have a specific target? So like you talked about, it's whether or not you're protected, but it's also, what is the value of attacking you, and then that what leads into what we see, like you said, a lot of things come in, really it's endpoint security. A lot of people put a lot of work into their firewalls, their edge devices, but that user gets an email and it looks legitimate, they click on it and it takes, it uses some obscure word, macro vulnerability, and then they're in your system. And then depending on the goal, they may just sit there. Like a lot of these big companies we've seen who have, millions of dollars spent on security, we see these advanced persistent threats where they actually sit in the network for months, just slowly siphoning data out. There's some data exfiltration going on.
Recently where they were 10 years. They were 10 years on their network.
Yeah, and so it just becomes something that, constantly feeds on, right? It's a recurring revenue model for hackers, I guess.
Well, and then once you start to pay the ransom, you're now a happy customer, right? And they'll hit you again. So, but I think that the sitting on network for 10 years is really a testament to the ROI on patience. Kind of to shift, I guess, topics a little bit, but keep it within the realm of what's happening in manufacturing. Many manufacturers are looking how they can interface with augmented reality or virtual reality. The case that comes to my mind is Lincoln Electric, actually at the original spot this event was going to be at, has a lab where they have virtual welding units to teach kids how to weld without wasting all the resources and breaking all the equipment with their first time welding. What's up?
That's genius.
It is great. And on the health side, I've seen augmented reality or virtual reality surgeries. Not that I would want somebody that has only ever done a virtual surgery to do a surgery on me, but it's still a good first step without wasting cadavers. As manufacturers are looking at implementing these, have you seen any of this really pop up in your travels, or how you want to integrate with it or interface with it from an implementer, an auditor, or a practitioner standpoint? open?
I mean, I have not virtual reality. Artificial intelligence, yeah, but not virtual reality.
As far as AI, what kind of cases have you seen?
Just being able to collect data off of, let's say, uses of a product, right? You know, maybe you have lots of sensors built into, I don't know, a coffee machine, or maybe not. And you want to be able to send that data back. And again, it all ties in with IoT and being able to use AI in order to be able to determine, you know, typical use cases and then make recommendations on how to design your product better. But beyond that, you know, nothing in the virtual reality space, at least not yet.
What I've mostly seen is what you talked about. So for virtual reality, really training on products, things like that would be much more expensive to, you know, break things as you're learning. For augmented reality, where you're seeing some virtual overlay, I see that a lot when it pertains to actually working on things. You know, like I read an article, I think, like at Boeing or one of those you know, big aero companies. They actually use augmented reality to help them while they're working on things, so they can see details, procedures, and things like that. So they use it to help them, you know, augment fixing things and stuff like that. But I'm not sure exactly where that comes into with manufacturing. I imagine something similar, but I haven't seen it myself.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how manufacturers are going to adopt those kind of technologies. There was a big push that I saw like 5 years ago in getting VR into the workplace, and that buzz has kind of died down a bit. So that kind of I was curious to see kind of if you guys were seeing any like niche implementations or whatnot aside from what we've been able to see at Tri-C's campus.
I mean, I've seen with some customers, excuse me, an interest in leveraging data to determine, to provide training input. So we have one customer that is in the meat processing business. There's a lot of redundant movement in terms of, you know, cutting up meats, right? So, and there's the right ways to do it and there's the wrong ways to do it. And you can actually learn a lot just by things like monitoring the current off of a device to determine whether or not, you know, they are properly trained in the way they're using the equipment. Well, maybe I'll be wrong here, but it does feel a little bit like, I think I could see it being utilized actually more in the R&D space. You know, where you want to be able to model things before you go too far down the road, and be able to get a sense and a feel. But when it comes to the manufacturer, I don't, and I could be wrong, but I don't think, I don't see presently you see a lot of value add. I want to add too that if you've noticed, this is a little bit of a biased position, but we see a lot of software solutions. And a lot of those come out of Silicon Valley, which, if you think about it, in the Silicon Valley, unlike here, it's software value these days. I mean, it's all software firms. And so as things change and start to move towards hardware, which is really what IoT is all about, well, what are their assets? Their assets are software engineers. So they're trying to find ways to leverage their talent pool, and their talent pool is software. So virtual reality, right? But at the end of the day, when it comes to us here in Northeast Ohio and in the Midwest, it's closer to the data. It's more, less virtual and more real. And I think that's where the value propositions are going to come from.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into kind of the next question I have for all of you, which is what are the challenges that Northeastern Ohio manufacturers are facing, in particular, that are unique to the region? And I mean that from a Northeastern Ohio perspective, a Midwest perspective, and a just not California perspective. Separately, if you could tier them in that answer, because California is kind of its own monster as far as what their problems are, especially with their own flavor of cybersecurity, you know, audit. But if you could just all give me your thoughts on what manufacturers in this region really have to face today. In no particular order.
All right. Well, I mean, I think that it's our strength. The fact that we are kind of right smack in the middle of what would be considered the manufacturing part of the country. I'm not a Clevelander originally. I've been here for 30 years, but I was told at one point, Cleveland was one of the largest cities in the
I've been told it was the 5th largest city for quite some time.
And Terminal Tower was the largest building in the United States. So we had, the Rockefellers of the world. I mean, we were really right smack in the middle of the last industrial revolution. And I think what we need to do is leverage our expertise in building things in the Midwest, in Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, in order to be able to have a competitive advantage from in contrast to the rest of the world. I think, and I've been to a lot of trade shows and things, and again, it's the same thing I see. Everyone is talking about, after the edge, all the cloud stuff, all the software stuff when I go to these trade shows. And they're usually in California. And by goodness, I mean, there is just so much going on here from our vantage point, my company, insofar as from that edge down. And that's, I think, where we really should be focused. That's my opinion. We should be focused on the edge down. That means the pipeline to get that data to the cloud, perhaps the gateway level, and then the engineering that goes on at the very close to the product level, and the engineering in terms of product development. That's where our strengths are, especially in the manufacturing space. Think about it, we've got Rockwell, we've got Parker Hannifin, we've got Eaton, we've got all of these, manufacturing powerhouses. We should be leveraging this.
The state is working to give you the tools to be able to leverage that type of technology in your products. So with the safe harbor, they're giving you they're incentivizing, making sure that you're good at what you're doing, you're protecting what you're doing. So the state is passing legislation to help you adopt these things that not only make you better, but protect the consumer too. So it's giving you a competitive advantage over other companies that aren't in our area or aren't in Ohio too. So
I think, like you talked about, there's a lot of manufacturing here. We have a big talent pool for it, right? Like you talked about, software out west. There's just a lot of people with, practical hands-on ability and training and knowledge to work on these manufacturing, to work in manufacturing. And I think that's an advantage we have. And I'd say the difficulty would be is it seems like a lot of education is trying to push people more towards, all the STEM things and the more, more software-based and cloud-based. But, I think that, vocational programs and things like that are really important to have partnerships with the manufacturers. So I'd say, the talent we have that's been here, but also maintaining that talent pool and growing that talent pool and working with, institutions to do that is probably a challenge that we have.
That's one final comment on that. Sometimes I can't help.
Yeah, mine's been going in and out.
All right, think about all the universities we have, and they're all quality universities we have in the Cleveland area. And even if you want to, God forbid, include Pittsburgh, right? So you have Carnegie Mellon, and then you've got, you've got Dayton and Toledo and Ohio State, and you have Tri-C, and you have Cleveland State, and you have Case Western. And I mean, my goodness, we have just an enormous number of really good universities here. And there's absolutely no reason why, with some effort, we could channel all the engineering activity, manufacturing activity through the universities to really kick up our game. And we are competing really more with the rest of the Midwest in a sense, right? Chicago, I want to say Minnesota.
Yeah, Grand Rapids, Indianapolis,
Yeah,
like those mid-market cities are really where I think that we're competitive.
Yeah, and they're doing the same kind of things. They're developing products and have manufacturing bases. So that's where the competition is.
Great. Well, I am going to open it up to Q&A. First, I'd like to force everyone to give them a round of applause. I realize that in my fervor of pitching OhioNet and Western Digital, I didn't actually give you a BlueBridge Networks spiel. I just was talking about the event, which is probably a testament to how many times I've been hit in the head. So what BlueBridge really is an IT company at its core. We were founded in 2004 as just a data center, and it was just ping power space. We basically kind of looked at it as really tiny, really expensive apartments for your laptops, or sorry, your servers. As people started to move in, they started asking, what kind of furniture can I put in my apartment? And we started to get into hardware, and then we started to get into software, then we started to get into, a little bit more into the telco space, and then when the advent of cloud computing came along, we adapted as a company. We have a very robust public cloud solution. We also have some private cloud solutions, again, centered around infrastructure. And again, at the request of our customers, they started to say, well, how do I secure, my environment? And we started doing some cybersecurity services, and then how do we manage that? Well, now we're getting into managed services, right? We're actively evolving per the request of our customer base that we're very fortunate to have, that has been, steadily growing, not only in Cleveland, but also in Columbus. And then, slowly but surely, we are making our way out of state potentially. So, we're really excited about the things that we have going on, and it's, through strategic partnerships we have with people that kind of, keep us honest, like Dale. We have, HioNet helps us out quite a bit too. Western Digital, a big storage component to it. We're very happy to leverage a lot of these relationships that we have. So these events, obviously they're educational, but they also allow us to interface with everyone here in a more intimate fashion. But not quite having coffee with everyone one-on-one. So I'm very grateful that everyone came out to that effect. And then after Q&A, we are going to have more networking because I was dealing with a lot of the traffic cone situation in the basement. I didn't get to talk to a lot of you. So if you could stay for a little bit and chat with me, I'd love to speak with all of you by the end of this. So you have a microphone in the back to pass around? Awesome. All right, so does anyone have a question? Raise your hand. He's going to come back.
Hi,
Yes.
I'm Bob Scott. So we're talking about cyber threats and all this kinds of things, but my perception is that as I'm talking to people that make investment decisions, they still haven't made the decisions to do the fundamental backups, just protection from fire, flood, and those kind of things. Am I nuts, or where's the state of the state? Is the threat about the same from cyber versus just traditional threats, or where are we right now?
So you're seeing this from large organizations or small?
Decent-sized companies. I mean, we're still seeing people that didn't have the backups, that had a disk drive fail, that never took any precautions. I think the fact that the Cleveland airport's been down for 3 days is a pretty good indication they never did a backup or had any, so I'm just kind of asking, which of those two threats is bigger, the traditional threats or the cyber threats? Because I'm talking to people that need to make investment decisions. I feel like I'm trying to get them to do the new Star Wars stuff, and they still haven't done the basics.
I think that goes back to the industry, like manufacturing, commercial industries are never really highly regulated. I think you're going to see that change, and I think they're going to be forced to make a decision one way or the other. And I know that's sad to say, up until now, they haven't been forced to do that, but I think it's coming. I think to be a viable competitor, you're going to have that. You're going to have to build that into your competitive advantage over your competitors. So,
I want to answer that a little bit. So it really comes down to the company, the operation, and how lean are you running? Do you have money to spend on that? How important is it to you? So as to which of those two things are bigger threats, I'd say, well, they're both threats to your data. So making sure that your data is backed up. So you can put all the great, wonderful, AI technology in for cyber, protection and things like that, and go through all your training. But if somebody still gets in and you don't have a good backup or really quick return time on your data, like you talked about the airport being down for a while. Just in a lot of companies, I think, like we talked about earlier, it's how important is it? How much money do you lose while you're down? How do you get that pushed through the budget type of thing? Because it's not something that's a direct interaction with the bottom line of the company, and that's really, I think, where it comes into play the most.
Miriam Ingalls, back to that bottom line point that you're making, I see in software as a service company, so these are companies that are selling their software to other businesses, that where they find the bottom line with complying for security is when they try to sell and their prospect or customer says, I need to know that you are secure before I will do business with you. So it becomes a sales objection in the middle of their sales pipeline, and that's when they address it. What I'm curious about, so that's the software side, is how much any of you are seeing that manufacturers are encountering this with their prospects and their customers.
Absolutely. And especially the larger organizations who are selling to even larger organizations, they are absolutely expecting highly secure products to be put into their facilities. I think the bigger you are, the bigger the risk. We have one customer that just did a vulnerability test with IBM, IBM X-Force, I think it's called. So absolutely, yeah, there's definitely being driven by the end customer, which is not surprising. But
I've actually seen a few clients in the past getting sort of forced into it by selling to the federal government. The government is now requiring them to have some type of audit before they'll continue on with the contract that they're signing. You're going to see that more and more. It's an unfortunate part of the industry is that they don't take care of it until they're forced to, but they're really starting to make sure that that's in the process now for, like, and I'm talking like manufacturers, like, cutting, building things, manufacturers are being required to do this stuff now. So I think you'll see it more and more.
it's kind of the classic, there really needs to be a red light here, right? And they don't put in a red light until there's an accident, and then there's a red light, I think it's a similar kind of thing.
Somebody has a microphone?
Oh,
Yeah.
how you doing? Thank you so much for coming out. Warren D. Lamberson Jr. I'm an Alcoa baby. My family's from Alcoa, born and raised. And so I see the manufacturing side. I also focus on succession planning as well in my current career. So I can take this back to my small business clients with their key man and succession planning stuff. I understand the data breaching and that type of deal, but as far as, can you speak to like success processes and systems for maybe the CEO or the owner or bid management to be able to have that dialogue, so if something happens, they don't just look for a 1-800 number? Or have you seen that as far as the internal side, what processes work best for management or senior leadership to put out the fire fast before they kind of just all don't know what to do?
I had mentioned a little bit earlier, I think I talked a little bit about that as it pertains to security, but also to, you're talking about succession planning. It's important to have, along with security, is having those processes and procedures in place and people know where they're at and people are trained on them. Today isn't the day to have, that company where you have that one guy that knows everything, and if he's not there or something happens, that's a big threat to your business. So definitely, I think those are important. I think those probably come into a lot. You guys probably see that a lot in the audit space as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, like literally, for small business owners, back to basics, sit down with a pen and paper, write what could go wrong, write what you have in one column and what could go wrong in another column. Put that into some formalized document, because most everybody's like, oh, I know that, it's up here. Yeah, but I guarantee you, if you're putting it down in front of you or down in front of you and your group, you're going to come up with other things that you need to account for, and that's eventually going to lead to a plan. And there's your plan. You don't want to have to try to come up with that plan in the moment when there is a breach or you are looking for that 1-800 number. That whole process of laying that out beforehand is what's going to give you that succession planning, or give you that plan that you're going to take in the event that something does happen. So that talking about it, documenting, formally documenting it, not just talking about it and giving it like lip service, literally formally documenting it is what you want to do.
And training and testing it as well.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Dan McMullen. I'm a partner with Calvin Halford and Griswold and practice intellectual property law and chair our firm's information technology practice. I have two comments. One, I want to underscore a comment made earlier about Ohio's relatively new safe harbor legislation. This is something that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but it should. Last November took effect, was adopted as Senate Bill 220 called the Ohio Data Protection Act. and it allows companies that can demonstrate they have adopted recognized data security frameworks, NIST frameworks, for example, FedRAMP. There's a list in the statute of prescribed frameworks that if a company conforms with those, they have an affirmative defense to claims for a data breach. So it's a little different approach to the treatment of data security than we've seen in other states, like the California statute, which kind of echoes GDPR. Ohio has tried to provide an affirmative reason for companies to act proactively in meeting data security frameworks, and it provides legal insulation in the event that there is a data breach. So that's something that really every company should be aware of. The second thing I wanted to say is that in talking about these data security issues, there's a whole cluster of questions around what kind of infrastructure the company installs, what software, what screens you run. But another overarching reality is that most enterprises' data security is impacted by multiple parties. There's not only the infrastructure that you have in-house, there's a whole series of vendor relationships. Nobody runs their whole IT environment anymore. And through those vendor relationships, and in particular, the contractual arrangements that parties make, liability and risk is shifted significantly. So that's a reason for people to pay close attention